I think, whereas in more classical training, the what is just something the universe is doing. The how is something you can learn, but you're the only one who can do it for the first time in your own body. And why is to return to why the what is the what. Why the universe is doing what the universe is doing. So we're going to spend most of our time on the how, but that ethic or that part of practice says, yep, it's up to you to do this for the first time. So I'm going to ask you to kind of follow me into what I guess I would call a bit of a little meditation or a bit of a envisioning of something. So let's say it's a very, very, very long time ago. Let's say 3 ice ages ago, whatever that might be, a couple 100,000 years ago. And your people, whoever your people were, are now dealing with this thing called winter. And living in a hut for, say, 6 months of the year and heating up rocks and, rolling them into your hut so no one freezes to death. But imagine sitting in a room, and this is a thing, some of us may have experienced, but it's pretty hard to find now. Imagine sitting in this hut for 6 months where you might go outside a few times in the winter, but for most of that several months, you're going to be sitting or lying down, awake or asleep or something in between, hanging out with the same 5 or 10 people for 6 months. And again, this is the first time, because we're doing this Huanyuan thing, the first time. What do you think your experience would be like if you were basically stuck in what, I guess in the modern sense, would seem like a prison cell with a bunch of people, and there was nothing else to do? And there was minimal food because winter, and it was really cold winter, and people may starve to death if we eat the food too fast. Maybe not the most romantic vision to start with, but given, of course, this conversation is about Qi Gong, meditation, breath work, and things like that, what would you think it would be like to be the first person to figure out how to actually thrive, stuck in a room with a bunch of people, not a very big room, for, say, 6 months straight? How would your body experience the limitation of movement, the limitation of variability? How would your body experience basically being in torpor, because months of just lying there or sitting there? Right. So you can imagine that, and then just for fun, imagine there's a cat sitting beside you. Let's not get historically pedantic here. It's a spirit cat. Or whatever. You probably would have eaten the thing anyway, but we're just going to decide there's this cat sitting beside you. If it was sitting beside you in this cave for 6 months and all it could do is sit there or lie down, what would that cat be doing a lot of the time? Right. So we can see right away the cat would be doing cat things like the pandiculation stretching that cats do 40 to 60 times a day. Your house cat is going to do that. And so would a post-primate early human stuck in a room for 6 months, because you would naturally have to keep moving because your body would just get so stiff and so sore and so lethargic, and your circulation would, especially as you got older, cause a whole bunch of problems. So the thing I'm, I guess, attempting to bring into your awareness is, it's an innate necessity to move and open and extend and rotate and articulate the body to its natural ranges of motion consistently, or you will actually lose your ranges of motion. You'll actually lose your muscles, any capacity to help you, and we're going to learn a lot about that in a minute. Right? And here's something to consider. There are people who can run maybe 100 miles over a few days or something like that. So it's definitely true that muscles can take a lot of sustained effort. But it's also true that if someone gave you something maybe heavier than a phone and said, hold it out like this for as long as you physically can, how long do you think people could do that? I mean, you can train that a little bit, but it's an important thing to visualize. Your muscles can't actually chemically and functionally sustain constant load, constant weight, without actually moving or changing things. And what happens in the body, as we all know, is you just get stiff. But what stiffness is when all the fascia between different muscles, fascia between different layers of connective tissue, they actually stick to each other like Velcro. Because again, the muscle can't hold your head up if you're, say you're doing this texting thing, which a lot of people do now. They have it where there's a, I don't know, I forgot the joke. Or the Facebook F is actually supposed to be a sideways picture of what people do when they're on Facebook, because we all look like an F, because we're all folded over like this. So to leave your head out like this, there are muscles that are holding your head up, but your muscles can't hold something up for too long. So again, the stiffness part is when the fascia of the 7 layers of tissue in your neck start grabbing onto each other like Velcro. That's the only way you can keep your head out there. So again, we go back, you know, a couple 100,000 years to our great ancestor in the cave. That's the thing that they were trying to deal with, is this combination of stiffening tissue to just maintain 1 or 2 physical postures, as well as the atrophy of the body, as well as the hibernation kind of metabolism. And that hibernation metabolism was what kept other people alive. So when you go back to this cave, and again, I'm speaking from one tradition's perspective, I think meditation was on the menu, because there was nothing else to do outside of conversation, is to actually be the mind being the mind. You can't, there's no clicker, there's no swipey, there's no distraction, there's nothing to read, there's you know, your vocabulary is plants, animals, movement, and weird things. Right? So when we imagine someone spending that much time in that environment, they would have been, on one level, one of the highest level meditation teachers you could ever meet today, because they spent their entire life, a few months a year, in deep meditation, in very similar to what monastic people have done for, you know, the last couple of 1,000 years. So just consider that, you know, okay, this person I'm pretending to be was so good at being underneath the mind for months in a row, like a repetitive yearly deep retreat. They probably got really good with breath work, because it's pretty natural when you're sitting there bored. You watch kids do it, they'll do weird things. I think every person I've ever really gotten into this with has a story of being a teenager going spinning around really fast and having someone squeeze their chest so they can't breathe in until they get really whacked out, then they fall on the ground giggling and they're high as F, because in a way you're doing a specific thing with breath work, right? But how many teenagers in that winter cave came up with something like that, right? So notice how creative and curious and interactive humans really are, and stuck in a cave for 6 months, being a really good meditator, being pretty much stuck with you, your body experience, and the occasional fart or story from somebody else in the hut. You would have explored every one of these interactions, and also you would have innately sort of had to keep moving and rotating and twisting and, you know, going along and doing these things. And it's no accident when you really look back into the history of Qi Gong and Dao Yin and all this stuff, that the first traditional practices that were passed on were people imitating animals. Right? So we're hunter-gatherers. We're living in this hut for 6 months. We're all telling stories. But why wouldn't we want to tell stories animately, by acting them out and, you know, pretending we're the big cat or the big bear, you know, or whatever else we might be pretending to be. So the long and short of what I'm hoping to bring to your awareness as kind of a playful meditation is, what would it feel like to be that consistently not anxious, not anticipatory, not reactive, just in the hut, in the body, in the breath, under the mind. Playing with breath and state, aware that hibernation and movement are your kind of 2 choices, and hibernation is important because it lets other people live, because there's more food, and movement's important because if it goes too far and you get really sick, you're not going to make it. So it's this interesting visualization, interesting image, and maybe some time to sit on the floor and drop into that meditative kind of image, and just move the way that you would actually would imagine movement would happen when you're stuck in a room for 6 months. Just breathing, just sitting, just mind, just body, with an invisible cat beside you going all the time. Because that's where things like Dao Yin, which I'll talk about in a moment, and the Yi Jin Jing come from. So the word Dao Yin, and I'm going to speak about this for a moment, because it has a lot of different definitions. One is sort of guiding and leading, and of course with the modern context being focused on Qi as a thing moving in places, people describe Dao Yin as the guiding of your Qi moving through your body, which in the modern sense makes sense because that's what people want to do today. When you actually look at the characters and think about what that person in the cave was experiencing, the character Dao means like Dao, like the way, the big sense of way, but it has this little thing attached to it, which means incremental. So there's something about guiding people or instructing people or leading people that has to do with sequences. So Dao Yin asks us first to notice there's going to be a sequence of interactions that we're going to do. And the character for Yin, it's not like Yin Yang Yin, it's a different one, describes the structure and kind of nature of a bow. Because there's the part of the bow that bends, the limb. We have 5 bows, your 2 arms, your 2 legs, your spine. But there's also a quality. The character for Yin is that exploration of the bows, the wood part of the bow and arrow, until you can find the stringy bit. So when you really, again, look at those characters from that Hunyuan perspective, the term Dao Yin describes incremental interactions with the bows of your body and the stringy bits. And I'm defining that or translating that in a really specific way, because if you were to do anything, and we're going to do a few examples in a minute, that's actually what you're experiencing. You know, you bend your spine a certain way, you turn a certain way, you're dealing with the wood part, the bow, but you're going to naturally stop when the stringy bits, the tight lines show up. And then we go back to that character Dao, which is now interact with that stringy tight bit in an incremental way. And that's the magic of Yi Jin Jing, the Shaolin approach to this, because they spent a hell of a long time really figuring out how the interactive sequence works. And you can do that. We learned some of those sequences in the previous course on therapeutic Qi Gong for using the sequences of contraction and release to release trauma and pain out of the body. You can use the same understanding, the same kind of, you often call it a formula, but approach through graduated contractions and release to build fascia, to build strength, to build better structure and balance in the body. So just giving us an idea that the earliest word in Chinese, one of the earliest terms in Chinese to describe all this weird stuff people do in, you know, huts for thousands of years in the winter or in parks today in Beijing, that's what the characters are saying. You're going to want to interact with the bendy parts until you find these stringy parts, and then get a really systematic way of interacting with them to produce different results, if it's release or if it's strength or if it's just balance. Right? So just something to consider about the meaning, the experiential meaning of some Chinese terminology.